I'm very honored today to have an opportunity to interview Jose. Jose are both, he's a friend of mine and he's also an incredible innovator in the industry. He's the founder and CEO of a company called Flexdrive, which is a subscription-based service company that's in the transportation business and automotive retail space. So we're going to just ask Jose a couple of questions. He's going to expand upon the story, how he got started, where he's going, and where he sees the future of transportation and automotive. So thanks for having me.
Thank you.
I think what everybody wants to know, and what I get a lot of questions back from dealers and feedback, is what exactly is subscription, and can you kind of expand upon its role in automotive?
Well, thanks for inviting me. I appreciate this opportunity. So what is subscription? The way that we define it is it's an alternative option for a consumer to have access to a car as an option to buying a car. And that means that, today, to draw some analogies, today I can take out my phone and I can request a ride on my phone through Lyft. We started with the paradigm thought of, well, what happens if we do that for a car? And what value does that create for a consumer? And then what value can that create for a dealer? And it really is kind of a transformational thing in the way that a dealer looks at how they do their business. So simply put, that's really what it is.
Great. And so what do you see right now? What are some of the barriers that you're facing in automotive, or what are some of the adoption issues that you're seeing? And with the dealers that have adopted this new form of technology, how are things going for them?
Yeah, so what's really driving the whole thing is a couple of things. On the consumer side, you have increasing cost of ownership, longer financing terms, higher car payments, insurance rates that are going up, toll fees. Like, you've got all these things that are really driving up the cost of ownership. Then you layer that on top of this generational shift that's coming with younger people. Like, I have a son that's 20 and he doesn't care about owning a car right now. And that, I think, is pretty much consistent across the board as you see, people in younger ages that are not even getting driver's licenses. So if you look at those things, then you look at the changing behaviors that we all have. Like I mentioned about, getting a car on your phone, getting a ride on your phone. What mobile has really kind of exacerbated in the market is this instant gratification mentality. And so if you look at those three high-level trends and you say cost of ownership, changing demographics, and changing consumer behaviors at any age, you sit there and say, okay, well, how does that really help a car dealer? Longer turn times, higher profit margin, lower profit margins because there's not an opportunity to sell things, and aging demographics. So what it does for a dealer is it provides them with an option to start building a ongoing relationship with their consumer, to where instead of selling them a car, they're selling them access to a car. And in effect, what they're doing is they're really transitioning that whole relationship they have with a consumer, where it goes from apprehension, consumers are apprehensive about going to a dealership, into one of anticipation. And we've seen that time and again. We've been doing this for close to 4 years, and we have deployments in, not even just in the US, we have deployments in other countries, and it's the same thing, the same experience that we observe with consumers coming in just super excited about being able to just come in and pick up the car they want and drive away within 2 minutes without any anxiety, any issues. They drive away, they're happy, they come back, and they switch cars whenever they want, and it just really helps create a more healthy relationship with the customer.
Excellent. Now, do you see where dealers question you, why is this different than, say, a rental car company, or why would the consumer just deploy or utilize a rental car service versus coming here and getting a subscription car from my particular dealership?
Yeah. Look, you could define it any way you want. Really, in our view, it's really fits between a lease and a rental. The difference with a lease is that there is no contract that you're signing. You're not obligating yourself to a financial contract. It's really a pay-per-use model. So it really skews more towards rental, but it's all about the presentation. If you walk into a dealership and says nobody's going to say, hey, would you like to buy this car or would you like to rent this car? Nobody would do that. But if you present it as a value proposition, say, hey, you can actually access this car through your phone, you can sign up within 2 minutes, and you're basically subscribing, and here's what that means. That means that you're going to get free oil changes, free maintenance, roadside assistance, and when you're ready, you can come back and bring the car back and get another car. It's an entirely different way of presenting the experience for the consumer. But technically, it is in effect structured as legally as a rental.
Completely understand. So, of all the dealers that you've signed up, and I know a number of them by name, but Give us some examples of some success stories or somebody who's really adopted it and implemented it as a systemic process in the store as part of their normal offering.
So we've been, like I said, we've been doing this for 4 years. The first 2.5 years, we owned our own fleet of cars, and we're really trying to understand the model. Will consumers do it? What are the risks? What kind of technology do we need to have to make it as most efficient as possible? And then can you make money doing it? And in the middle of last year, around May, we sold off our fleet, and then we started onboarding dealers. So today we have 12 dealership groups, and what we've really been doing is working with the different types of dealer groups, all the way from an independent all the way up to a large franchise dealership group, to really understand like how do they absorb it, how do they operationalize it. And so you see a number of different things. We've got a great dealer group down in Florida, Florida Fine Cars, that they adopted it, and they've basically stood up an entire line of business around, and they're actually scaling that out. They've now added 3 more cities, and they're really going like full-fledged behind this program. That's one implementation. On the Holman side, for example, they have 6 dealerships in Philadelphia area, and they've basically integrated into the entire way that they retail cars in their new car stores. So you have people in the store that have all been trained on how to offer it to a consumer. There's banners, there's materials, and so it really depends on the dealership group and how they want to actually go after it. But that's really what we're really focusing on, is how do we make sure that we've created a model that is really simple and easy for a dealer to implement, without having to go out and hire people and do all kinds of other things to try to support it. So it has the least amount of friction operationally as possible.
Gotcha. And are you seeing more and more dealers reaching out to you, contacting you to decide, what can we do for subscription? Like, what's the next step for mobility in my dealership? Is there a heightened sense of awareness and a need to provide this to the consumer amongst the dealer body?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of dialogue and conversation about it. It's supported by what some of the OEMs are doing. Like, Cadillac had a program a couple years ago, and then they shut it down, and they just announced they're bringing it back. Volvo's very heavy into it. Audi's, done some things around that area. I see that it's at a high level. OEMs are really pushing for that, and I think that's all kind of based on the fact that they see the success that Tesla's had with a direct relationship with the consumer, and they kind of envy that. And I think that on the operational side for dealerships, I think there's a lot of dealers that want to do it and are intrigued by it, but it's definitely not for every dealer. It's, that's what we found, is that there's a lot of people that want to do it, but operationally, when we go in and we actually evaluate the opportunity, we there's things that we have to look at and say, is this dealer really going to actually execute on this? And so we look for a number of things to do that. The demand for it is pretty good. But I think we're in the early stages, and I think what we've got to focus on is getting dealers to be really successful with it and have best practices, so it makes it easier for dealers that maybe aren't quite as ready for it. As the market evolves, there's easier ways to understand how to actually integrate it. And we also get a lot of demand from international. We've got a lot of groups that are contacting us from outside the U.S., and we're not even marketing ourselves in that regard. And they have different problems over there. Like we're about to do a deployment in Norway. The problem they have over there is they have 2 things. They have sales tax on cars is 100% of retail. And then you have another problem where you have legislative regulations that are changing around how they're incentivizing cars. And they're basically offering no tax on EVs, no parking fees, no toll fees. And so the market's evolved and started buying all these EVs. It sold 55% of all cars in Norway this year have been all EVs. Well, what does that do to all these diesel cars from a depreciation standpoint? What about the dealers that don't have EVs? Where are they going to get caught? So that's the problem we're trying to solve over there, is provide these dealers and the banks that own the balance sheet on all these cars the opportunity to have consumers have access to diesel cars that are basically going to be banned in 2025.
Sure, excellent. Well, that kind of leads me to my next question. So I know you've gone international. I'm aware of some of the countries that you're in. I'm aware of some of the platform relationships that you have with Lyft and et cetera. But what is next for Flexdrive as it pertains to automotive retail and then a bigger automotive vertical in general?
Well, I think, like I said, we're in the early stages of this transformation. I think we were talking earlier about, to try to provide some way to look at it. If you think about it, like the iPhone's been around more or less 10 years, maybe a little bit longer. But the world didn't need a phone with one button on it. And then you think about like that just from from a phone standpoint, but you think about the effect that that's had across industries with things like music and movies like Netflix and things like Uber. I mean, you look at all these things and you're like, wow, like that's a huge transformation. If people think that that's not going to happen in automotive, they're short-sighted. Automotive is so entrenched in the way that we do business that it's hard to kind of break out of that and start envisioning a different future. But my view is that 10 years from now, consumers are not going to be buying cars. And you just got to start with that. And then you've got to look at what you've got and you say, I've got a market knowledge, I've got deep roots and presence here, I have physical location, I have people, I have cars that people need. Whether they're electric cars, autonomous cars, it doesn't matter. People still need a vehicle to get transported around. But you have to start changing the way that you think about your business as a dealer, of being a transactional business with somebody that I may never see again, to one of a relationship business, which if you look at the biggest, most successful companies in the world, like Apple or Amazon or Google, they all have, at their core, a passionate desire to own the relationship with the consumer. And I'm not saying that a dealer has to look at the world that way and say, I want to be Amazon, but you have to apply those principles if you want to be viable in the future, because somebody's going to do it.
Yeah, all those companies are definitely customer-centric and with their focus, there's no doubt about it. So, well, thanks for your time. We're going to open up to the audience for some questions. Feel free to respond. If you want to share some of your contact for information, or if a dealer has some additional questions for you, let us know how they can get in touch with you.
Yes, sir.
What is pricing typically like for the consumer, and what is the subscription, what do they get for their subscription?
Sure. The pricing really depends on how the dealer wants to structure it. We give them recommended pricing. So, the way that our model works is that, dealers already have inventory. We recommend that they use off-lease cars because those cars have already depreciated the most and they're still in good condition. They typically have carryover warranty on them. And so, what we recommend is that you have an offering that starts at $400 a month, and that it will go up as high as you want it to go. I mean, we've got some dealers that have cars in there, brand new Maseratis for $2,700. So I think the key there is to make sure that you're understanding, what's the average price that a consumer wants to pay and who your customers are and what your clientele is. The average price today that we're seeing that consumers are paying is about $825, which pretty much aligns with what AAA says is what the current cost of ownership of a car is. And you got to keep in mind that that might sound high, but all you have to do is go take out a calculator and start looking at how much did I put down on a car and amortize that? How much am I paying on my monthly payments? How much am I paying on insurance? Everybody looks at it fractionally. If you put it all together, you're going to realize you're paying about that much money anyway for an average car. So that's what consumers have been paying. We have over 20,000 active subscribers right now. That's about the average that we're seeing, and it's been consistent for years. We've done an enormous amount of consumer research. And I bring that up and I elaborate it to that degree because I do get a lot of feedback when people say, well, that's too expensive. Who would pay that? My feedback is what I just said. Do the math, look it up, and you'll see that that's about what it is. And then the other thing I would say is, we don't know what too much is. We just know what consumers will pay. Well, there's options out there at all different prices of the spectrum. What we're seeing is consumers are naturally gravitating to cars that are about $800 a month, and they have no problem, and retention is unbelievable. I mean, consumers stay in cars for well over a year. And where we thought the value proposition was going to be around the ability to switch cars whenever you want, that's actually the least interesting thing for consumers that are in the program. What they really like is the ability to control the transaction on their phone that takes 2 minutes. They like the ability to swap, and they like the ability to not have any friction at all when they have an issue with the car, when it needs an oil change or it needs new tires. They don't have to deal with any of that stuff. They love the convenience of it.
That's a great question. So let's expand upon that just for a second. Are you seeing consumers gravitate to any one make or model?
Interestingly, what we're finding is that when consumers are giving a broad option of vehicles, they're going pretty much with what is retailing. It doesn't really vary that much, where you would think like, oh, well, people might want to drive a convertible BMW, or they want to drive this Jeep Wrangler that they didn't want to buy, or they want to try out this electric car. What we're finding is that what we call the meat and potatoes is really what people really gravitate to anyway naturally. And then if you fill it around with maybe 5% of your inventory with pickup trucks, depending on the market, some sports cars, convertibles, just a sampling of these kinds of cars. You get a lot of utilization out of those cars that consumers take, but those are the cars that turn the fastest. Those are the cars that people do swap. But what we see is that people will be in an average, small SUV for 3 months, and then they'll say, hey, you know what, this weekend I want to go drive a convertible, so they'll swap into a Mustang convertible and they'll drive that for a week, and then they'll come back and, because maybe they had a vacation or they had a special occasion they wanted to have that car for, but they always come back to the basic average car. And really the way that we're going to the market and the way that we're approaching it as we go and interview and meet with dealers, we're looking for dealers that are really trying to address this problem in the market. And to us, it's 60% of the consumer market that's dealing with this challenge of car financing. And that's really the monster we're trying to slay, is how do I get you out of debt? Right? That's really the way we see it is consumers don't really own cars, they own car loans. And so you're driving a car, you're caught up in it, you're owing on that car, longer and longer and longer terms. You're paying the same payment for a car 5 years later than the first payment you made, and the car's not worth it anymore. And so that's the way we look at it, is how do we create a solution that really solves that problem for consumers where they're not burdened with debt and they actually have flexibility. There's plenty of cars on the road, there's plenty of dealers that have cars, there's plenty of supply. What's really defining how that kind of moves is financing. And that's ultimately the tension point in retail. That's what drives the negative relationship between the consumer and the retailer.
No, agreed. So you mentioned something earlier that I kind of stuck in my head in this conversation is retention. You say the retention rate is very high on a subscription type product. Explain that a little bit more, because I know that's an important aspect of the dealer's profitability is retention rate.
Yeah. Well, what we're finding is that the average consumer that signs up stays in the program for a minimum of 12 months. 17% of people will switch a car within the first 90 days. 42% of people that leave come back within 2 weeks and sign up again because the value proposition is so strong. We have an NPS of 74 with consumers.
Excellent. Any more questions?
Can you talk a little bit about the income or monetization of a subscription structure for a dealer?
Sure.
Like anything else, they're entrepreneurs, so I think if we could give them an idea of how the income flow would be made available to them.
Yeah, and thank you for asking. That's a really important question. And that's really when we started looking at building this business. We started thinking about that to begin with, because otherwise it's a concept, and there's no question that if you offer this, consumers will gravitate to it quickly. We didn't have any concerns around the consumer demand. We really spent a lot of time focusing on how does this actually make money for a dealer. And effectively what you're doing is you're monetizing depreciation, you're monetizing your operating costs, and you're monetizing the insurance and all the different pieces that come into it. So we've developed a technology platform that has vertically integrated solutions like fleet management, like insurance. We have usage-based insurance, so the dealer doesn't have to overpay for insurance. And we've compressed all those operational costs to such a degree that the biggest factor is depreciation, and that's unpredictable. So what we've done is we've got a team of BI engineers that basically look at massive amounts of data, transactional data, going back like 4 years, and analyzing and tracking what real-time depreciation is on a car, and we provide our dealers with that insight every day so that we give them recommendations about whether they need to adjust the pricing, when is the best time to pull that car out of the program and sell it. That's the approach we take, because what we found is if we just leave it to dealers and say, hey, go put on whatever cars you want, typically what they're going to do is they're going to gravitate to the cars that they hadn't sold, that are costing them the most amount of money, and they're going to say, well, I'm upside down this amount, so I'm going to go put this in the subscription platform, and I'm going to charge like way more money than I should. And then consumers go online and go, why would I pay $1,200 for a Pontiac Aztek? Doesn't make any sense. So we realized that we had to really provide that level of detail to our dealer customers so that they understand what are the best cars, what's the right price to put it at. The dealer has a discretion to price it at whatever they want, but we give them recommendations, and if they follow those trend lines and they follow our recommendations, not only are they going to have a profitable model on a unit basis, but they're also going to have a profitable model when they go and either wholesale the car or retail the car. So that's what I believe is our fundamental value proposition to a dealer, is that we really look at compressing costs on the operational side as much as possible, and then providing them with the data and insights to make sure that they're not, running themselves into the ground.
Great one. Any more?
So do you find this model works better in a larger city where you have more customers to choose from, as opposed to the smaller dealers in the little outside cities?
Yeah. So we did a lot of consumer research when we started this, because it's easy to drink your own Kool-Aid, right? We put 30 cars out, they were gone in 2 weeks, and we thought, oh my God, everybody wants to do this. So we spent an enormous amount of money doing extensive market research over about 6 months, and we surveyed over 2,000 consumers across the country in all different demographic groups, regions. The research told us that the two coasts are the most, have the most demand for this kind of thing from a consumer perspective. The Midwest is, a little bit slower. To answer your question specifically, sure, a bigger market's going to naturally have more demand. But surprisingly, we have a dealer in, I believe it's like Blacksburg, Virginia, Charlottesville, Virginia. And he launched a subscription, and if you look at the adoption in his market compared to the adoption that we've had in like South Florida, it's the same. And it's a very rural, market, not a big city at all. And surprisingly, the take rate on the consumer side has been identical. So I think that what we're really talking about here is addressing this real problem that consumers have. And when you're alleviating that burden of not getting a car loan and still providing access to the car, that's a universal appeal to consumers. And that's actually something that we've seen, like I said, in Norway. We're running a pilot with our partner over there, and it's the exact same thing. In 30 days, they already had 30 people out on the road in cars without even a mobile app. That was just like, I'm just testing it to see if people would do it. So it's consistent, and we're seeing the same thing happen pretty much everywhere.
Any more questions?
I do have a quick question. Have you had any, with millennials and their buying patterns, and that a lot of people have been concerned about that affecting the car business? So one would think with this type of method that they would really take to this type of process. Are you seeing, though, that in your customer demographic that there are other generations that are having higher takes that you wouldn't expect?
The average age for a consumer that's doing this today is between 35 and 45. That, if you look at, because we track that data, and it's actually like skews even slightly higher with female, between male and female. But that's about the age group, and it's consistent between both male and female. Now, to be clear, the youngest that you can be right now is 25. With the exception of something that we're doing in New York City, you can be 18 there, because legally you have to be able to offer cars to people that are 18. Of course, they have to pay a higher fee, but that's about the average age.
You mentioned earlier that one of your business problems that you're solving is removing debt for people, and I think that's a grand vision, and I can see that, especially for people that are trying to get into an automobile. But the traditional retailer talks about credit worthiness and how do they qualify to get into a various stage of loan, whether it's prime all the way down to subprime. For subscription, are you removing some of those credit barriers so people can get into cars? How easy is it for someone to qualify for a program?
Yeah, there's two parts to that, two answers to that question. First of all, there is no credit check because it's not necessary. There is technology that's being deployed, so we don't ever have any issues with people driving off with cars that disappear. So that takes care of that. And we see consistently, regardless of what country it's in and how long we've been doing this, about 2% of the consumers are going to have an issue with. And oddly enough, they are people that you would least suspect it with. And these would be people that you would assume don't have credit issues, because they just don't care. They're like, whatever. I'll get another car. I don't care. But on the other side, while buying a car and getting a car loan in an uncertain economy can create a liability for somebody, because maybe they lose their job and now they're really in trouble because they can't meet their car payment anymore. What a lot of the credit agencies are doing now, because of this emerging shift of non-ownership, just in general of things, is, and we meet with pretty much all the credit agencies, because we're trying to understand how does subscription help somebody build credit. Today we could easily just report all the data and run credit checks and whatever, consumers wouldn't care. We wouldn't use it as a qualifier. But we could provide all that data to the credit agencies. Our question is, what are they going to do with it, and how do we actually legitimately tell a consumer that, hey, this is helping you build credit where you may not have credit? We haven't quite figured that out yet, and that's something that we're working on, because we do want to be able to say that to people. When you look at somebody that's, you look at what, 30% of the population today that is considered subprime. That, the assumption and the stereotype is that these are people that, didn't know how to manage their credit, or they went out and did things that they shouldn't have done, and they're just not great behaving people. But the reality is that that's not true for everybody. There are people that were in situations that they got caught up in a bad situation, or maybe they've never been in a job where they can actually build credit. Or maybe there's somebody that have just recently moved to the United States. I got plenty of Canadian friends that have been here for less than a year. They can't get credit. So it's all around the definition of what's credit challenge. And I think if you're looking at this Gen Y group, like I was saying, my son, their definition of credit is completely different than what we grew up with. Today you can go in and you can do a credit app and it has a simulator, and it says if you have a car loan and you pay this much, how does it, and you can see your credit goes up. Well, what about if you don't have that? And what happens when a lot of people and a lot of consumers just stop doing that because they don't need to? So how does the evolution, and I think you've already seen a lot of things happen, particularly in the last 2 years, about how credit agencies are actually tracking the way that they're qualifying people's credit. And subscription services, whether it's car subscription or it's a Netflix subscription, they're looking at that and saying, how do we build a model that says, here's behaviors that we're seeing with people that actually pay subscriptions for an extended period of time, and here's how we can create some risk modeling around how we can actually affect their credit rating. So I see that as something that's going to evolve over the next couple of years, and you're going to see it be a real thing.
Doesn't look like we have any more questions, so thanks.
Great. Yeah,
Always
thank
a
you.
pleasure.
Yeah, thanks. Good to see you.
Thank you, Jose.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks.